The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the military mess hall, casting harsh shadows across the rows of metal tables where soldiers sat hunched over their evening meals. The air was thick with the smell of reheated meatloaf and instant mashed potatoes, mixed with the underlying scent of industrial disinfectant that seemed to permeate every military facility. Sarah Martinez sat alone at a corner table, methodically eating her dinner while observing the room with the practiced eye of someone trained to notice everything. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another support staff member. Her uniform bore the insignia of a communications technician, and her petite frame and quiet demeanor seemed to reinforce the assumption that she was nothing more than a desk worker who happened to find herself stationed at this remote forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan. The other soldiers barely acknowledged her presence, which was exactly how she preferred it. Sarah had been maintaining this cover for 3 months now, carefully building her reputation as a harmless tech specialist while secretly gathering intelligence on a suspected arms trafficking network that had been funneling weapons to insurgent groups throughout the region. Her real identity was known only to a select few in the highest levels of military command. She was Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a highly trained Navy SEAL operative with over 8 years of experience in covert operations. The mission had required her to assume a completely different persona, something that came naturally after years of specialized training. She had learned to alter her posture, change her speaking patterns, and even modify her eating habits to blend seamlessly into her cover role. Every detail had been meticulously planned, from the fake service record that had been inserted into the military database to the carefully crafted backstory that explained her presence at the base. As she sat there picking at her food, Sarah noticed a commotion near the serving line. Sergeant Marcus Williams, a loud and aggressive soldier who had made life miserable for several junior personnel, was berating one of the kitchen staff. Williams stood well over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos that spoke of his rough background. He had a reputation for bullying anyone he perceived as weak, and his superiors seemed content to look the other way as long as he performed his duties competently. Sarah had been watching Williams for weeks, not because he was connected to her mission, but because his behavior reminded her of the bullies she had encountered throughout her life. Before joining the military, she had grown up in a tough neighborhood where learning to defend yourself was a matter of survival. Her small stature had made her an easy target until she discovered martial arts, and later, the rigorous training that would eventually lead her to become one of the few women to successfully complete SEAL training. Williams finished his tirade against the kitchen worker and began scanning the mess hall, apparently looking for his next target. His eyes settled on Sarah, and she could see the familiar gleam of someone who enjoyed intimidating others. She continued eating, keeping her expression neutral while internally preparing for what she suspected was coming. The base had been on high alert for the past week following intelligence reports of increased insurgent activity in the area. Several convoys had been hit by improvised explosive devices, and there were rumors of a major offensive being planned. The stress was getting to everyone, and Williams was the type of person who dealt with pressure by taking it out on others. Sarah's real mission was progressing slowly but steadily. She had identified several suspicious patterns in the base's supply chain and had begun tracking communications between certain personnel and outside contacts. The arms trafficking network she was investigating appeared to have connections within the military itself, which made her work both dangerous and delicate. Any misstep could blow her cover and potentially cost lives. As Williams approached her table, Sarah noticed that several other soldiers had stopped their conversations to watch. She recognized the anticipation in their faces. They had seen this scenario play out before with other victims. Some looked uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene, while others seemed almost eager to see what would happen. Williams stopped directly in front of her table, his massive frame casting a shadow over her meal. Well, what do we have here?" he said in a voice loud enough for half the mess hall to hear. "Little Miss Tech Support thinks she's too good to sit with the real soldiers." Sarah looked up at him with what appeared to be nervous apprehension, though internally she was calculating distances and assessing potential threats. Her cover required her to appear intimidated, even though every instinct told her to respond to the challenge. Years of specialized training had taught her to compartmentalize her emotions and maintain her role regardless of personal feelings. "I'm just trying to eat my dinner, Sergeant," she replied in a soft voice that carried just the right amount of fear to sell her performance. Williams laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Just trying to eat your dinner," he repeated mockingly. "You know what I think? I think you're a stuck-up little princess who thinks she's better than the rest of us." The tension in the room was palpable now. Sarah could sense the other soldiers watching, some with sympathy, others with the morbid curiosity that drew people to watch train wrecks. She had to make a split-second decision about how to handle the situation while maintaining her cover. Her training had prepared her for moments like this. Undercover operatives often found themselves in situations where they had to endure abuse or aggression without revealing their true capabilities. The key was to respond in character while looking for opportunities to defuse the situation or, if necessary, defend herself without blowing her cover. Williams reached out and knocked over her water glass, sending liquid splashing across the table and onto her lap. The sound of breaking plastic echoed through the suddenly quiet mess hall. "Oops," he said with obvious satisfaction. "Clumsy me." Sarah stood up slowly, water dripping from her uniform, and began reaching for napkins to clean up the mess. Her movements were deliberately awkward, reinforcing her image as a harmless support worker who was out of her depth in this environment. But her eyes never left Williams, and she was acutely aware of his positioning and body language. "You know what your problem is?" Williams continued, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. "You don't know your place. This isn't some corporate office where you can hide behind a computer all day. This is a combat zone, and weak little girls like you have no business being here." The irony of his words was not lost on Sarah. She had seen more combat than most of the soldiers in the room, had completed missions that would be classified for decades, and possessed skills that would probably terrify Williams if he knew the truth. But her mission required her to endure his ignorance and maintain her facade. As she bent to pick up the broken pieces of the plastic cup, Williams suddenly grabbed her by the shoulder and spun her around to face him. The physical contact crossed a line that Sarah had hoped to avoid, but she forced herself to react as her cover identity would, with fear and confusion rather than the trained response that came naturally to her. "When I'm talking to you, you look at me," Williams snarled, his grip tightening on her shoulder. Sarah could smell alcohol on his breath and realized that he had been drinking, which made the situation even more unpredictable. The mess hall had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch the confrontation. Sarah knew that word of this incident would spread throughout the base within hours, and she had to be careful about how she handled it. Any response that seemed too skilled or confident could raise questions about her background. Williams leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. "I asked you a question, Princess. Do you think you're better than the rest of us?" Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could continue to play the victim, which would maintain her cover but might encourage Williams to escalate further. She could try to defuse the situation with words, though Williams seemed beyond reason at this point. Or she could find a way to end the confrontation without revealing her true capabilities. "No, Sergeant," she said quietly, allowing her voice to shake slightly. "I don't think I'm better than anyone." Williams studied her face, apparently looking for signs of defiance or disrespect. What he saw was exactly what Sarah wanted him to see, a frightened young woman who was completely out of her element. The performance was flawless, honed by years of training and practical experience in situations far more dangerous than this one. But then, Williams made a mistake that would change everything. Instead of accepting her submission and moving on, he decided to push further. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the adrenaline rush he got from intimidating others, but he raised his free hand as if to strike her. "Damn right you're not better than us," he growled. "And it's time someone taught you exactly where you belong." Sarah saw the blow coming before Williams even knew he was going to throw it. Her training had taught her to read micro-expressions and body language, to anticipate violence before it happened. She had perhaps 2 seconds to decide how to respond, and those 2 seconds would determine whether her carefully constructed cover survived intact. The mess hall seemed to hold its breath as Williams drew back his hand. Sarah could see the shock and fear on the faces of the other soldiers, most of whom had never seen Williams actually resort to physical violence. There would be witnesses to whatever happened next, which meant her response would be scrutinized and remembered. In that frozen moment, Sarah made her choice. She would take the hit if necessary to maintain her cover, but she would be ready to respond if Williams escalated beyond a simple slap or shove. Her mission was too important to risk over a confrontation with a drunken bully, but she also knew that there were lines that could not be crossed, even for the sake of maintaining deep cover. Williams's hand came forward in a clumsy swing aimed at her face. To Sarah, it seemed to move in slow motion, telegraphed so obviously that she could have avoided it with minimal effort. But, instead of dodging, she began to position herself to absorb the blow while making it look accidental if she had to defend herself. The sound of the slap echoed through the silent mess hall like a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and she stumbled backward, her hand rising instinctively to her cheek. The pain was sharp, but manageable. She had endured far worse during training and in actual combat situations. But something had changed in the room. The other soldiers were no longer just watching with morbid curiosity. There was genuine shock and anger on many faces. Physical violence against support personnel, especially women, was a serious offense that could result in court-martial proceedings. Williams had just crossed a line that even his most loyal supporters would find difficult to defend. Sarah remained in character, her eyes filling with tears that were only partially in act. The sting of the slap was real enough, but, more importantly, she was genuinely angry at the humiliation and the threat to her mission. She had to channel that anger into her performance while simultaneously calculating her next moves. Williams seemed suddenly aware that he might have gone too far. The alcohol-fueled confidence that had driven him to this point began to waver as he looked around the room and saw the expressions on the other soldiers' faces. But, instead of backing down or apologizing, he doubled down on his aggression. "That's what happens when you disrespect a senior NCO," he announced to the room, though his voice lacked the confidence it had held moments before. Sarah raised her head slowly, her hand still pressed to her reddening cheek. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone in the mess hall to hear. "I never disrespected you, Sergeant. I was just trying to eat my dinner." The simple dignity of her response seemed to shame some of the witnesses even more than the violence itself. Here was someone who had been minding her own business, who had done nothing to provoke the attack, and who was responding with quiet courage rather than either cowering in fear or lashing out in anger. Williams apparently realized that he had lost the moral high ground completely, but rather than retreating gracefully, he chose to escalate further. "You want to mouth off to me?" he shouted, raising his hand again. "I'll give you something to really cry about." This time, Sarah knew she couldn't simply absorb another blow. Williams was clearly out of control, and allowing him to continue his assault could result in serious injury that would compromise her ability to complete her mission. Moreover, failing to defend herself at this point might actually seem suspicious. Even a support technician would have natural self-preservation instincts. As Williams's second swing came toward her, Sarah made another split-second decision. She would defend herself, but she would do it in a way that could be explained as luck or instinct rather than training. She stumbled backward as if trying to escape, but positioned herself so that Williams's own momentum would work against him. When his fist came forward, Sarah ducked and twisted, causing Williams to overextend and lose his balance. What happened next could be interpreted as either an accident or a simple defensive reaction. As Williams stumbled past her, Sarah's elbow came up and caught him in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and sending him crashing into a nearby table. The entire sequence took less than 3 seconds, and, to most observers, it appeared that Williams had simply lost his footing while trying to hit her. The fact that Sarah's elbow had found exactly the right spot to disable him temporarily could be attributed to pure luck, especially given her apparent inexperience with physical confrontation. Williams lay on the floor gasping for breath, his face red with exertion and embarrassment. The mess hall erupted in voices as soldiers began talking all at once, some moving to help Williams, others approaching Sarah to see if she was injured. Sarah remained in character, appearing shocked and frightened by what had just happened. "Is he okay?" she asked in a trembling voice, as if she was genuinely concerned about the man who had just assaulted her. The response from the other soldiers was immediate and telling. Several of them moved to shield Sarah from any further confrontation, while others helped Williams to his feet with obvious reluctance. The incident had clearly shifted the dynamic in the room, and not in Williams's favor. As Williams struggled to catch his breath, his eyes locked with Sarah's across the mess hall. For just a moment, she saw something flicker in his expression, a hint of suspicion, as if some part of his brain was trying to process how a simple communications technician had managed to put him on the floor. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by rage and embarrassment. The aftermath of the confrontation would prove to be just as important as the incident itself. Word would spread throughout the base within hours, but the story that spread would depend largely on how Sarah handled the next few minutes. She had to maintain her cover while also ensuring that Williams faced appropriate consequences for his actions. As the crowd around them grew, Sarah noticed that someone had already gone to fetch the military police. Her heart rate increased slightly as she realized that she would soon be giving statements about the incident, potentially to investigators who might ask probing questions about her background and training. The next few hours would test every aspect of her cover story and her ability to maintain her facade under intense scrutiny. But as she stood there in the mess hall, surrounded by concerned soldiers and facing the possibility of a formal investigation, Sarah Martinez knew that her most dangerous mission was just beginning. The military police arrived within 15 minutes of the incident, their heavy boots echoing against the mess hall floor as they surveyed the scene. Sergeant First Class Jennifer Walsh led the team, her sharp eyes taking in every detail from the overturned table to the nervous faces of the witnesses. Sarah remained seated where the medic had placed her, an ice pack pressed against her swollen cheek, while Williams sat across the room, nursing his bruised ego and struggling to explain how he had ended up on the floor. Master Sergeant David Chun, the base's senior military police investigator, arrived shortly after the initial response team. Chun had 22 years of military experience and had investigated everything from minor disciplinary infractions to serious war crimes. His reputation for thoroughness was both respected and feared throughout the base. As he entered the mess hall, his presence immediately changed the atmosphere from chaotic to controlled. Sarah watched Chin's approach with careful attention, noting the way he observed the scene before speaking to anyone. This was exactly the type of scrutiny she had hoped to avoid, but she knew that trying to minimize the incident now would only raise more suspicions. Her cover required her to cooperate fully while maintaining the persona of a frightened support technician. "I need to speak with everyone who witnessed what happened here," Chin announced to the room. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Nobody leaves until I've taken preliminary statements." The next 2 hours tested every aspect of Sarah's training in maintaining deep cover. Chin interviewed witnesses methodically, cross-referencing their accounts and looking for inconsistencies. Sarah found herself going over the incident repeatedly, each time having to remember exactly what her cover identity would have seen and felt, rather than what she had actually experienced. When Chin finally interviewed Sarah directly, she could sense his professional skepticism. Military police investigators were trained to be suspicious of everyone, especially in cases involving assault. The fact that a supposedly inexperienced communications technician had managed to put a large, aggressive soldier on the floor would naturally raise questions. "Walk me through exactly what happened when Sergeant Williams made contact with you," Chin said, his notebook ready and his digital recorder running. Sarah took a careful breath, organizing her thoughts to present the narrative from her cover identity's perspective. "He grabbed my shoulder and spun me around. I was scared because he had been drinking, and he was so much bigger than me. When he raised his hand the second time, I just tried to get away from him. I think I ducked, and he lost his balance when he missed me." Chin studied her face as she spoke, looking for the micro-expressions that might indicate deception. Sarah had been trained to control these tells, but she knew that appearing too composed might itself be suspicious. She allowed appropriate nervousness to show while maintaining consistency in her account. "You think he lost his balance?" Chin pressed. "Are you not sure what happened?" "Everything happened so fast," Sarah replied, which was partially true despite her ability to process rapid sequences of events. "1 second he was swinging at me, and the next he was on the floor. I was just trying not to get hit again." The investigation continued for several more days, during which Sarah had to maintain her cover while also continuing her intelligence-gathering mission. The incident had actually provided her with some unexpected advantages, as several soldiers who had previously ignored her now went out of their way to check on her welfare. This increased social contact gave her access to conversations and information that had been difficult to obtain before. Williams, meanwhile, was facing serious disciplinary action. The base commander, Colonel Patricia Hayes, had made it clear that assault on support personnel would not be tolerated under any circumstances. Williams found himself confined to quarters pending a full investigation, his security clearance suspended, and his access to sensitive areas revoked. The irony was not lost on Sarah that Williams's attempt to intimidate her had actually removed a potential obstacle to her mission. As a senior NCO with broad access to base facilities, Williams might have eventually noticed patterns in her movements or questioned her presence in areas where communications technicians wouldn't normally need to go. 3 days after the incident, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Captain James Rodriguez from Base Intelligence knocked on her quarters door just after evening chow, his expression serious and professional. Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, though she maintained her composure as she invited him in. Ms. Martinez, I wanted to follow up on the incident in the mess hall, Rodriguez began, settling into the single chair in her small quarters. I've been reviewing the statements, and I have some additional questions. Sarah nodded, sitting on her bunk and maintaining the slightly nervous demeanor that had become second nature over the past few days. Of course, sir. I'll help however I can. Rodriguez opened a file folder and reviewed several pages before looking up at her. Your service record shows that you completed basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, then went directly to your current MWES training. No combat training, no hand-to-hand combat instruction, no self-defense courses. Is that accurate? The question was exactly what Sarah had been expecting, and she had prepared for it carefully. Her cover identity service record had been crafted to show minimal exposure to combat training, which made her defensive reaction to Williams's attack seem more surprising. Yes, sir. Just basic training, and then straight to communications school. I've never been in a physical fight before that night. She paused, allowing a slight tremor to enter her voice. I was terrified when he grabbed me. I just reacted without thinking. Rodriguez made a note in his file. Several witnesses described your reaction as unusually quick and precise for someone without training. One soldier said it looked like you knew exactly what you were doing. Sarah forced herself to appear confused and slightly hurt by the implication. I don't understand, sir. I was just trying to get away from him. If it looked like something else, I honestly don't know why. The captain studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could see him weighing her response against whatever suspicions had prompted his visit. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. Ms. Martinez, I want you to understand that we take the safety of all our personnel seriously. If someone is operating under false pretenses on this base, it creates security risks that we cannot tolerate. Sarah met his gaze directly, allowing appropriate confusion and concern to show on her face. Sir, I don't know what you mean by false pretenses. I'm exactly who my records say I am. I'm a communications technician from Ohio who joined the Army to pay for college. The only thing I've ever lied about is my age on my first job application when I was 16. The detail about lying on a job application was a calculated addition to her response. It provided a small, believable confession that would make the rest of her statement seem more honest by comparison. It was a technique she had learned during interrogation resistance training. Rodriguez closed his file folder and stood up. I hope that's the case, Ms. Martinez. But I want you to know that we'll be keeping a closer eye on things around here. If there's anything about your background or your presence on this base that you need to tell me, now would be the time. After Rodriguez left, Sarah allowed herself a moment of genuine concern. His visit indicated that her performance during the incident had raised flags with base intelligence, which could complicate her mission significantly. She needed to be even more careful about maintaining her cover while also accelerating her intelligence gathering before suspicions grew stronger. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Sarah was assigned a new quarters mate, Specialist Ashley Chun, a genuine communications technician who had just arrived from Germany. Ashley was young, enthusiastic, and exactly the kind of person Sarah's cover identity would naturally befriend. As Ashley unpacked her belongings, she chattered constantly about her previous assignments and her excitement about finally getting a deployment. Sarah listened carefully, looking for opportunities to strengthen her own cover story while also gathering any useful intelligence. I heard about what happened in the mess hall, Ashley said as she arranged her personal items on her wall locker. That Williams guy sounds like a real piece of work. I'm glad you're okay. Sarah had been expecting this conversation and had prepared appropriate responses. It was pretty scary, she admitted. I never thought something like that would happen here. Ashley paused in her unpacking to look at Sarah with sympathy. My instructors at communications school warned us about soldiers like that. They said some combat troops think support personnel are weak or don't belong in military. But you showed him, didn't you? The comment was innocent, but it touched on exactly the kind of interpretation that Sarah needed to discourage. I didn't show him anything, she replied quickly. I just got lucky that he lost his balance. If he hadn't been drinking, things might have turned out very differently. Over the following week, Sarah used her growing friendship with Ashley to further establish her cover credentials. Ashley's genuine expertise in communications technology provided perfect camouflage for Sarah's own activities, and having a roommate who could vouch for her daily routines helped deflect any remaining suspicions about her background. The investigation into Williams eventually concluded with his reduction in rank and transfer to another unit. The base command wanted to make an example of him while also removing a potential disciplinary problem from their ranks. Sarah testified at his disciplinary hearing via written statement, maintaining her consistent account of events while avoiding any details that might contradict her cover story. During this period, Sarah's intelligence-gathering mission began to yield significant results. The arms trafficking network she was investigating had apparently been using the base's communication systems to coordinate shipments, and Sarah's access to the communications center gave her opportunities to monitor suspicious transmissions. Working during night shifts when security was more relaxed, Sarah began documenting patterns in encrypted communications that matched the timing of known weapons transfers. The work was painstaking and dangerous, as any discovery of her activities would blow her cover completely and potentially compromise ongoing operations throughout the region. The key breakthrough came when Sarah identified a series of coded transmissions that referenced specific grid coordinates in the local area. Cross-referencing these coordinates with intelligence reports about insurgent activities, she began to see a pattern that suggested the arms trafficking network was not only providing weapons, but also intelligence about coalition force movements. This revelation elevated her mission from a simple arms trafficking investigation to a potential counterintelligence operation. If elements within the base were providing operational intelligence to insurgent forces, the implications for base security were catastrophic. Sarah knew she needed to gather more evidence before reporting her findings, but the stakes had suddenly become much higher. The pressure of maintaining her cover while conducting increasingly dangerous intelligence work began to take its toll. Sarah found herself constantly analyzing every interaction, every conversation, every routine activity for potential threats to her mission. The incident with Williams had made her more visible on the base, which was both helpful and dangerous for her intelligence-gathering efforts. Ashley's presence as a roommate provided both cover and complication. While having a genuine communications technician nearby helped validate Sarah's cover story, it also meant she had to be extremely careful about her activities during off-duty hours. Sarah developed elaborate routines for accessing restricted areas and monitoring communications without arousing Ashley's suspicions. The investigation into Williams had also created an unexpected side effect. Several soldiers who had witnessed the mess hall incident began seeking Sarah out to share their own experiences with bullying and harassment. While these conversations helped reinforce her cover as a victim rather than a trained operative, they also consumed time and emotional energy that Sarah needed for her mission. One particularly challenging encounter came when Corporal Michael Torres, who had been present during the incident, approached Sarah during her lunch break. Torres was a combat engineer with 2 previous deployments and a reputation for being observant and intelligent. "I've been thinking about what happened with Williams," Torres said, settling into the seat across from her in the mess hall. "Something about that whole situation doesn't sit right with me." Sarah felt a familiar spike of adrenaline, but she maintained her calm exterior. "What do you mean?" Torres leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. "I've seen a lot of fights, both in training and over here. What you did to Williams, that wasn't just luck. That was good technique, even if you don't realize it." The observation was exactly what Sarah had been hoping to avoid, but Torres seemed genuinely concerned rather than suspicious. She decided to address his comment directly while reinforcing her cover story. "I honestly don't know what happened," she said, allowing uncertainty to show in her voice. "I was just trying to get away from him. Maybe I watched too many movies or something." Torres studied her face for a moment, then seemed to reach a decision. "Look, I don't know what your background really is, and I don't need to know. But if you ever need backup or someone watching your six, you can count on me. What Williams did was wrong, and the way you handled it earned my respect." The offer was both touching and potentially useful, but it also represented another complication in maintaining her cover. Sarah thanked Torres while mentally noting that she would need to be even more careful around him in the future. As her investigation continued, Sarah began to identify specific individuals who appeared to be involved in the arms trafficking network. The pattern of communications suggested a cell of 3 or 4 people working together, with connections that reached beyond the base itself. The challenge was gathering enough evidence to identify these individuals without exposing her own activities. The pressure of her mission, combined with the ongoing scrutiny from the Williams incident, forced Sarah to make increasingly difficult decisions about risk and operational security. Each day brought new challenges to maintaining her cover while pursuing intelligence that could potentially save lives and disrupt a significant threat to coalition operations in the region. 2 weeks after the mess hall incident, Sarah's investigation reached a critical turning point. While conducting routine maintenance on communication equipment during a late-night shift, she intercepted a coded transmission that made her blood run cold. The message contained detailed information about an upcoming supply convoy route, including timing, vehicle counts, and security protocols that were classified at the highest levels. The implications were staggering. Someone with access to operational planning was actively feeding intelligence to insurgent forces, and they were doing it through the base's own communication systems. Sarah quickly recorded the transmission using equipment she had secretly modified for this purpose. But she knew that possessing this evidence put her in immediate danger. As she worked to decode the message in the privacy of her quarters while Ashley slept, Sarah realized that the timing coincided with a major supply operation scheduled for the following day. If insurgents were planning an ambush based on this intelligence, dozens of coalition soldiers could be killed or wounded. She had to find a way to prevent the attack without compromising her cover or her ongoing investigation. The challenge was immense. Warning Base Command about the leaked intelligence would require explaining how she had obtained the information, which would blow her cover completely. But allowing the convoy to proceed into an ambush was unthinkable. Sarah spent the remainder of the night developing a plan that might allow her to prevent the attack while maintaining her mission. Early the next morning, Sarah reported to the communications center for her regular shift. She had decided to create a plausible scenario for discovering the leaked intelligence, but it would require precise timing and careful execution. As she began her routine equipment checks, she watched for the right opportunity to accidentally discover evidence of the security breach. The opportunity came when Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, the communications center supervisor, assigned Sarah to troubleshoot a connectivity issue with one of the encrypted communication terminals. This gave Sarah legitimate access to the system logs and transmission records that would contain evidence of the unauthorized communications. Working carefully to maintain the appearance of routine troubleshooting, Sarah began documenting anomalies in the system logs that indicated unauthorized access and transmission activities. She made sure to follow standard procedures for reporting security concerns, which required her to immediately notify Santos of any suspicious findings. "Sergeant, I'm seeing some unusual activity in these logs," Sarah reported, allowing appropriate concern to show in her voice. "There are encrypted transmissions going out on frequencies that aren't authorized for this terminal." Santos immediately came to review Sarah's findings, her expression growing more serious as she examined the evidence. Within minutes, she was on the phone with base intelligence, reporting a potential security breach that required immediate investigation. The response was swift and comprehensive. Captain Rodriguez arrived at the communications center within 20 minutes, accompanied by a full investigative team. Sarah found herself once again under scrutiny, but this time as the person who had discovered the security breach rather than as a potential suspect. "Walk me through exactly how you found this," Rodriguez instructed, his tone professional but urgent. Sarah explained her troubleshooting process step by step, providing a detailed technical account that demonstrated her legitimate expertise while avoiding any mention of her previous knowledge about the leaked intelligence. Her cover identities training and communications technology provided perfect justification for her ability to identify the security anomalies. As the investigation team worked to trace the source of the unauthorized transmissions, Sarah learned that the supply convoy had been delayed pending a security review. Her plan had worked. The immediate threat had been neutralized without compromising her cover or her mission. But the success came with unexpected complications. The investigation into the security breach brought additional scrutiny to the communications center and everyone who worked there. Sarah found herself subjected to enhanced background checks and security interviews that tested every aspect of her cover story. During one particularly intense interview, Master Sergeant Chen questioned Sarah about her technical abilities and how she had managed to identify security anomalies that had previously gone undetected. "Your instructors at communications school speak very highly of your technical aptitude," Chen noted, consulting a file that Sarah assumed contained her fabricated training records. "They mentioned that you had an unusual grasp of advanced concepts for someone with no prior experience." The comment was clearly designed to probe for inconsistencies in her background, and Sarah had to respond carefully. "I've always been good with computers and electronic equipment," she replied. "Even as a kid, I was the one who fixed things when they broke. I guess some people just have a knack for technical stuff. Chen made notes in his file before continuing. Your discovery of this security breach likely prevented a major attack on our forces. That's the kind of observation and analytical thinking that usually comes from experience and training beyond basic communication school. Sarah recognized the investigation technique. Chen was using praise to encourage her to reveal more about her background than her cover story supported. She needed to deflect his probing while maintaining the persona of a naturally gifted but inexperienced technician. Honestly, sir, I was just doing routine troubleshooting like I was trained to do, she said. I noticed something that didn't look right and reported it. I had no idea it was anything serious until Sergeant Santos called it in. The investigation continued for several days, during which Sarah had to maintain her cover while also continuing her own intelligence-gathering efforts. The security breach had clearly spooked the arms trafficking network, and their communication patterns changed dramatically following the discovery. This presented both challenges and opportunities for Sarah's mission. While the network's increased caution made them harder to track, their reaction to the security breach also revealed additional information about their operations and membership. Sarah began to see connections that had previously been hidden, including links to personnel she had not previously suspected. One particularly significant development came when Sarah noticed that Staff Sergeant Kevin Morrison, a logistics coordinator with access to convoy planning information, had been absent from the base during the time period when the leaked intelligence would have been transmitted. Morrison's service record showed extensive experience in communications technology from a previous assignment, which would have given him the skills necessary to conduct the unauthorized transmissions. Building a case against Morrison required careful surveillance and documentation that pushed the limits of what Sarah could accomplish while maintaining her cover. She began tracking his movements and activities, looking for patterns that would confirm his involvement in the trafficking network. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Sarah had to maintain her regular duties in the communications center while also conducting surveillance and intelligence analysis during her off-duty hours. The constant vigilance required to avoid detection while gathering evidence was taking a physical and mental toll that she couldn't allow to show. Ashley's presence as a roommate became both an asset and a liability during this period. While Ashley provided perfect cover for Sarah's nighttime activities, her genuine friendship also created emotional complications. Sarah found herself genuinely caring about Ashley's welfare while also having to deceive her about fundamental aspects of her identity and activities. The breakthrough in identifying Morrison came when Sarah discovered that he had been accessing convoy planning databases during times when he had no legitimate reason to be in those systems. The access patterns matched the timing of several known insurgent attacks, providing strong circumstantial evidence of his involvement in leaking operational intelligence. But gathering this evidence required Sarah to access classified databases using techniques that went far beyond her cover identity's supposed capabilities. She had to be extremely careful to mask her activities and ensure that her unauthorized access couldn't be traced back to her. The solution came through a carefully planned operation that took advantage of a routine system maintenance window. During a scheduled communications center upgrade, Sarah volunteered for overnight duty to monitor the systems during the maintenance period. This gave her legitimate access to administrative functions and database logs that would normally be restricted. Working through the night while the base slept, Sarah compiled a comprehensive dossier on Morrison's activities, including detailed logs of his unauthorized database access and analysis of the correlation between his activities and subsequent insurgent attacks. The evidence was damning, but presenting it would require another carefully orchestrated discovery that wouldn't compromise her cover. The opportunity came when Morrison made a critical error. During a particularly complex convoy planning session, he accessed intelligence databases in a way that left obvious traces of unauthorized activity. Sarah was able to discover these traces during routine system monitoring and report them through proper channels. Within hours of Sarah's report, Morrison was taken into custody by military police. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and under interrogation, he revealed the existence of the entire arms trafficking network, including the identities of his confederates and the methods they had been using to smuggle weapons to insurgent forces. The success of the operation was everything Sarah had hoped for, but it also brought unexpected scrutiny. As the person who had discovered both the initial security breach and the evidence that led to Morrison's arrest, Sarah found herself being praised for exceptional analytical abilities and attention to detail that seemed remarkable for someone with her supposed background and experience. Colonel Hayes personally commended Sarah for her contributions to base security, noting that her discoveries had potentially saved dozens of lives and disrupted a major threat to coalition operations in the region. The recognition was gratifying, but it also raised Sarah's profile in ways that could complicate future missions. More immediately concerning was the interest shown by several intelligence agencies who wanted to recruit Sarah for more advanced positions based on her demonstrated abilities. Captain Rodriguez approached her with offers of specialized training and assignment to intelligence units that would have provided excellent career opportunities for someone with Sarah's cover identity. Declining these offers without arousing suspicion required careful navigation. Sarah had to express appropriate gratitude while providing plausible reasons for wanting to complete her current assignment before considering other opportunities. She cited personal commitments and a desire to gain more experience in her current role, explanations that were accepted but noted in her personnel file. The dismantling of the arms trafficking network marked the successful completion of Sarah's primary mission, but it also created new challenges for maintaining her cover. The attention and recognition she had received made it difficult to return to the anonymous role of a routine communications technician. Ashley noticed the change immediately. "You've been different since all this stuff with the security breach happened," she observed one evening as they prepared for sleep. "It's like you're more confident or something. Not that there's anything wrong with that," she added quickly. "I think it's great that you're getting recognized for your abilities." The comment highlighted one of the ongoing challenges of deep cover operations. Success in maintaining cover often required suppressing natural abilities and confidence, but achieving mission objectives sometimes required demonstrating exactly those suppressed capabilities. Balancing these competing requirements was an art that required constant attention and adjustment. Sarah spent the following weeks working to rebuild her low-profile persona while also preparing for extraction from her assignment. Her mission had been completed successfully, but leaving the base without arousing suspicions about her true identity would require careful planning and execution. The process was complicated by the genuine friendships she had developed during her assignment. Ashley had become a true friend, and several other soldiers had shown her kindness and respect that made her departure more difficult than anticipated. Sarah found herself genuinely reluctant to leave people who had accepted her fabricated identity and shown her authentic human connection. The final phase of her assignment involved gradually reducing her visibility and responsibilities in preparation for a routine transfer that would provide cover for her extraction. Sarah began expressing interest in assignment to a different base, citing family considerations and career goals that made a transfer seem natural and expected. As her departure date approached, Sarah reflected on the complexities of her mission and the personal costs of maintaining deep cover. She had successfully infiltrated and dismantled a significant threat to coalition operations, but doing so had required her to live a completely fabricated existence for months while forming relationships based on deception. The experience had tested every aspect of her training and revealed both the capabilities and limitations of deep cover operations. As she prepared to resume her real identity and return to her unit, Sarah knew that the lessons learned from this mission would influence her approach to future assignments and her understanding of the psychological challenges faced by undercover operatives. 3 months after the successful dismantling of the arms trafficking network, Sarah found herself facing an unexpected complication that threatened to unravel everything she had accomplished. She was scheduled for extraction in 2 weeks when Captain Rodriguez approached her with disturbing news that would force her to make the most difficult decision of her career. "Martinez, we've intercepted intelligence suggesting that there's another security threat on this base," Rodriguez informed her during what appeared to be a routine debriefing. "Someone has been asking questions about you specifically, and we think it might be connected to a larger investigation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she maintained the composed demeanor that had served her well throughout the mission. "What kind of questions, sir?" Rodriguez consulted his notes before responding. "Someone has been reviewing your service records, your assignment history, and particularly your performance during the Morrison investigation. They're also asking about the incident with Williams and how a communications technician managed to put a trained soldier on the ground." The news confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Despite her careful attention to maintaining cover, someone had noticed inconsistencies in her background or performance that didn't match her supposed identity. The question now was whether this scrutiny represented a routine security review or something more dangerous. Do we know who's conducting this investigation? Sarah asked, already beginning to calculate contingency plans for emergency extraction. That's the concerning part, Rodriguez replied. The queries are coming from someone with high-level security clearances, but we can't identify exactly who or what agency they represent. It's being conducted through channels that suggest either intelligence agencies or Special Operations Command. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Special Operations Command was investigating her, it could mean that her real identity had been compromised or that someone suspected her of being more than she appeared. Either scenario represented a critical threat to operational security that could endanger not only her current mission but also future operations. The immediate challenge was determining whether she should maintain her cover and try to resolve the situation or request emergency extraction before her identity could be fully compromised. Both options carried significant risks and potential consequences for ongoing operations in the region. Sir, what do you want me to do? Sarah asked, knowing that Rodriguez's answer would help her gauge how much base command knew about her real identity. Rodriguez studied her carefully before responding. For now, continue with your regular duties and maintain normal routines. We're working to identify the source of these inquiries and determine what they might mean for base security. But I want you to be extra careful about your activities and report anything unusual immediately. The next few days were among the most stressful of Sarah's career. Every interaction, every routine task, every casual conversation had to be analyzed for potential threats to her cover. She found herself constantly aware that she might be under surveillance, either by hostile agents or by friendly forces who suspected her true identity. The situation became more complicated when Ashley began noticing her increased tension and asking concerned questions about her behavior. As a roommate and friend, Ashley was naturally observant about changes in Sarah's demeanor, but her innocent questions created additional pressure to maintain the facade of a routine communications technician. You've been really on edge lately, Ashley observed one evening. Is everything okay? You seem like you're worried about something. Sarah had prepared for this type of conversation, but Ashley's genuine concern made it more difficult to deflect her questions with simple explanations. I guess I'm just thinking about my transfer request, Sarah replied. It's always stressful waiting to hear about assignments. The explanation was plausible but incomplete, and Ashley clearly sensed that there was more to Sarah's anxiety than routine career concerns. However, her respect for personal boundaries prevented her from pressing for more detailed explanations. During this period of heightened alertness, Sarah began to notice subtle changes in how other personnel interacted with her. Several soldiers who had previously been friendly and casual in their interactions now seemed more formal and guarded. The shift was subtle but consistent enough to suggest that word of some kind of investigation had spread through the base's informal communication networks. The most significant development came when Sarah discovered that someone had attempted to access her personal computer during a period when she was on duty in the communications center. The attempt had been sophisticated enough to bypass standard security measures, but Sarah's extensive training in operational security had led her to install additional monitoring software that detected the intrusion. Analysis of the attempted access revealed that whoever had conducted it possessed advanced technical skills and knowledge of military computer systems. This was not a routine security check or casual snooping by curious personnel. Someone with serious capabilities was actively investigating her background and activities. Sarah faced a critical decision point. The attempted access to her personal computer represented a significant escalation in whatever investigation was being conducted. She could request immediate extraction, which would ensure her safety, but might compromise ongoing operations and waste months of intelligence gathering. Alternatively, she could remain in place and try to identify who was investigating her and why. Her decision was influenced by a conversation with Corporal Torres, who had become one of her most trusted allies on the base following the incident with Williams. Torres approached her during lunch with information that made the stakes of her situation clear. I've been hearing some strange rumors lately, Torres said quietly, settling into the seat across from her in the mess hall. Word is that there's some kind of special investigation going on, and your name has come up in connection with it. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she maintained her outward composure. What kind of investigation? Torres glanced around to ensure they weren't being overheard before continuing. Nobody knows for sure, but there are rumors about security breaches and possible infiltration by hostile agents. Some people are saying that investigators are looking at anyone who's shown unusual capabilities or access to sensitive information. The information confirmed Sarah's suspicions that her successful intelligence work had drawn unwanted attention from security personnel who were trying to identify potential threats to base operations. The irony was bitter. Her efforts to protect base security were now being interpreted as evidence that she might represent a security threat herself. "Have you heard my name specifically mentioned?" Sarah asked, knowing that Torres's answer would help her assess the immediate danger to her cover. Torres nodded grimly. "A couple of people have mentioned that investigators are asking questions about the Morrison case, and how you managed to identify the security breaches that led to his arrest. There's also talk about the Williams incident, and whether your background story adds up." The conversation with Torres clarified the scope of the investigation and helped Sarah understand that her cover was under serious scrutiny from multiple angles. The combination of her technical abilities, her defensive capabilities, and her success in identifying security threats had created a pattern that raised red flags for security personnel. That evening, Sarah made the decision to take proactive steps to address the investigation before it could compromise her extraction. She needed to find a way to redirect suspicion without revealing her true identity or capabilities. The solution would require careful planning and precise execution. Using her legitimate access to base communication systems, Sarah began monitoring internal security communications to identify who was conducting the investigation and what specific concerns they had about her background. The work was dangerous, as any discovery of her activities would provide definitive proof of capabilities beyond those of a routine communications technician. The monitoring revealed that the investigation was being led by a joint task force that included representatives from military intelligence, base security, and an unidentified special operations unit. The focus of their investigation was broader than just Sarah. They were looking at anyone who had demonstrated unusual capabilities or access to sensitive information during recent security incidents. More concerning was the discovery that the investigation had already identified several inconsistencies in her background that didn't match standard personnel records. Someone had noticed that her technical abilities exceeded what would be expected from her training record, and they had found gaps in her previous assignments that couldn't be adequately explained by her cover story. Sarah realized that her extraction would have to be accelerated significantly. The investigation was moving faster than anticipated, and it was only a matter of time before investigators began asking questions that her cover story couldn't adequately address. The extraction plan required her to create a plausible reason for leaving the base immediately, while also ensuring that her departure didn't raise additional suspicions about her true identity. The solution came in the form of a family emergency that would require her immediate return to the United States for compassionate leave. Working with her extraction team through encrypted communications, Sarah began laying the groundwork for her emergency departure. The fabricated family crisis had to be severe enough to justify immediate transfer, but not so dramatic as to attract additional scrutiny from base personnel who might remember the details later. As she prepared for her departure, Sarah found herself genuinely emotional about leaving the relationships she had formed during her assignment. Ashley had become a true friend, and several other soldiers had shown her kindness and respect that made her departure more difficult than she had anticipated. The final challenge came when Captain Rodriguez requested a private meeting to discuss her transfer request. Sarah knew that this conversation would be critical in determining whether her extraction could proceed smoothly or whether additional complications would arise. "Martinez, I've been reviewing your transfer request in light of recent security concerns on the base," Rodriguez began. "I have to ask you directly. Is there anything about your background or your activities here that you think we should know about?" The question was the one Sarah had been preparing for throughout her assignment. Her answer would determine whether she could complete her extraction successfully or whether she would face additional investigation that could compromise future operations. "Sir, I've been completely honest about my background and my activities," Sarah replied, maintaining direct eye contact while allowing appropriate concern to show in her expression. "I'm a communications technician who happened to be in the right place at the right time to identify some security problems. I understand that might seem unusual, but sometimes luck and attention to detail can make someone appear more capable than they really are." Rodriguez studied her response carefully, and Sarah could see him weighing her words against whatever suspicions had prompted his question. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision that would determine the immediate future of her mission. "Your transfer has been approved," he said. "You'll be departing tomorrow morning for emergency leave. I hope your family situation resolves itself quickly. The successful approval of her extraction represented the culmination of months of careful planning and execution. Sarah had managed to complete her mission, maintain her cover, and extract safely despite serious challenges to her operational security. As she packed her belongings and prepared to leave the base that had been her home for the past several months, Sarah reflected on the complexities of deep cover operations and the personal costs of maintaining a false identity for extended periods. The mission had been successful, but it had also tested the limits of her abilities and revealed both the potential and the dangers of long-term undercover work. 6 months after her extraction from Afghanistan, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez found herself in a sterile conference room at the Naval Special Warfare Command headquarters in Coronado, California. The debriefing process had been extensive, involving detailed analysis of every aspect of her deep cover operation and its implications for future missions. Today's meeting would determine whether her cover had been permanently compromised or if she could return to operational status. Admiral Patricia Fleming, the commander of Naval Special Warfare, reviewed the final assessment reports before looking up at Sarah with an expression that mixed respect with concern. Lieutenant Martinez, your operation in Afghanistan was successful by every measurable standard. You identified and neutralized a significant security threat, prevented multiple attacks on coalition forces, and extracted without compromising ongoing operations. Sarah maintained her professional composure while internally preparing for the inevitable qualification that would follow the Admiral's praise. Deep cover operations were never evaluated solely on their immediate success. The long-term implications for operational security and the operative's future utility were equally important considerations. However, Admiral Fleming continued, the post-operation analysis has revealed several concerning developments that affect your future assignment options. The Admiral opened a classified file folder containing reports from multiple intelligence agencies that had been monitoring the aftermath of Sarah's mission. The contents would determine whether her career in special operations could continue or whether her exposure during the mission had made her too recognizable for future undercover work. First, the individual who was investigating your background during the final weeks of your mission has been identified, Admiral Fleming began. Master Chief Petty Officer Richard Kane, a SEAL instructor from Coronado, was conducting an unofficial inquiry after noticing similarities between your defensive techniques and specific training methods used in our advanced combat programs. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Kane had been one of her instructors during SEAL training, and his ability to identify her techniques despite her efforts to disguise them represented exactly the kind of operational security breach that could compromise future missions. Master Chief, Kane didn't realize he was investigating one of our own operatives, Admiral Fleming explained. His inquiry was motivated by genuine security concerns about potential infiltration. When we briefed him on the classified nature of your assignment, he provided valuable feedback about maintaining technique discipline during deep cover operations. The revelation that her own instructor had nearly blown her cover was both embarrassing and educational. It highlighted the challenges of completely suppressing specialized training while maintaining operational effectiveness. Future missions would require even more careful attention to technique discipline and behavioral modification. Second, the Admiral continued, our analysis of base communications during your extraction revealed that several personnel continued to express suspicions about your background even after your departure. While none of these suspicions approached the truth, they indicate that your cover identity may have been more fragile than initially assessed. Sarah had expected this development. The combination of her technical abilities, defensive capabilities, and investigative successes had created a pattern that exceeded what would be expected from someone with her cover identity's background. Future cover identities would need to be constructed more carefully to accommodate the natural expression of her capabilities. The question now, Admiral Fleming said, is whether you can return to operational status and, if so, what modifications might be necessary for future assignments. The next several hours involved detailed discussion of lessons learned from the Afghanistan operation and their implications for special operations doctrine. Sarah's experience highlighted both the potential and the limitations of deep cover operations in military environments where personnel were trained to notice anomalies and inconsistencies. Commander James Walsh, the officer responsible for deep cover operations, presented several options for Sarah's future assignments. We can modify your operational profile to accommodate your demonstrated capabilities, he explained. Future cover identities could be constructed around backgrounds that would naturally explain your technical and defensive abilities. The options included assignments as a military contractor with previous law enforcement experience, a former athlete with martial arts training, or a technical specialist with academic credentials that would explain her analytical capabilities. Each option would provide more plausible explanations for the skills that had nearly compromised her Afghan mission. Alternatively, Sarah could transition to training and support roles that would utilize her experience without requiring her to maintain long-term deep cover. Her insights into the challenges of undercover operations would be valuable for preparing other operatives and improving operational security protocols. There's also a third option, Admiral Fleming added. Based on your performance in Afghanistan, you've been selected for consideration for a new program that combines special operations capabilities with intelligence analysis. It would involve shorter-term assignments with less emphasis on sustained deep cover. The new program represented an evolution in special operations thinking, recognizing that the most effective operatives might be those who could alternate between direct action missions and intelligence gathering operations rather than specializing exclusively in one area. Sarah considered her options carefully. The Afghanistan mission had been professionally successful but personally challenging in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. Maintaining a false identity for months had required constant vigilance and emotional discipline that took a significant psychological toll. "Ma'am, I'd like to hear more about the new program," Sarah replied. "The Afghanistan mission taught me a lot about the challenges of long-term deep cover, and I think shorter assignments might be more sustainable while still utilizing the skills I've developed." The discussion that followed provided insights into the future of special operations and the evolving threats that required new approaches to intelligence gathering and direct action missions. Sarah's experience in Afghanistan had contributed to a broader understanding of how traditional military operations and intelligence activities were becoming increasingly interconnected. Over the following weeks, Sarah underwent extensive psychological evaluation to assess the long-term effects of her deep cover operation. The process revealed both strengths and areas for improvement in how special operations personnel were prepared for and supported during undercover assignments. The psychological evaluation confirmed that Sarah had successfully maintained her core identity and professional judgment throughout the mission, despite the stress of constant deception and the emotional challenges of forming genuine relationships under false pretenses. However, the evaluation also identified areas where additional support and preparation could improve the sustainability of future operations. Based on these findings, Sarah was selected for the new hybrid program that would combine short-term intelligence missions with direct action operations. The program was designed to maximize operational effectiveness while minimizing the psychological and security risks associated with long-term deep cover assignments. Her first assignment under the new program involved a 3-week operation in Southeast Asia, where she would conduct surveillance and intelligence gathering on suspected arms dealers while maintaining a cover identity as a freelance journalist. The shorter duration and different cover identity would test the program's hypothesis that brief, varied assignments might be more effective than extended deep cover operations. The preparation for this new mission incorporated lessons learned from the Afghanistan operation, including enhanced training in technique discipline, improved psychological support protocols, and more sophisticated cover identity construction. Sarah found herself working with a team of specialists who had analyzed every aspect of her previous mission to identify areas for improvement. As she prepared for her new assignment, Sarah reflected on how the incident with Williams in the Afghan mess hall had set in motion a chain of events that fundamentally changed her career trajectory. What had seemed like a simple confrontation with a bullying soldier had ultimately led to uncovering a major security threat and reshaping how special operations approached intelligence missions. The experience had also taught her valuable lessons about the personal costs of deception and the importance of maintaining authentic connections even while operating under false identities. Her friendship with Ashley and her positive relationships with soldiers like Torres had provided emotional anchors that helped her maintain her psychological stability throughout the mission. Looking forward, Sarah knew that her career would continue to evolve as special operations adapted to changing global threats and operational environments. The skills she had developed and the lessons she had learned would influence not only her own future missions but also how the military trained and supported other operatives facing similar challenges. The incident that had begun with a drunken sergeant's attempt to intimidate what he thought was a helpless communications technician had ultimately contributed to significant advances in special operations doctrine and capability. Sarah's successful navigation of that crisis and the complex mission that followed had established her as one of the most capable operatives in her field. As she boarded the transport aircraft that would take her to her next assignment, Sarah carried with her the confidence that comes from successfully completing one of the most challenging missions in special operations. She also carried the knowledge that her experience would help prepare future operatives for the psychological and operational challenges of working in the shadows between military action and intelligence gathering. The mess hall incident that had threatened to expose her cover had instead become the foundation for a new understanding of how special operations could adapt to evolving threats while maintaining the human connections that made such dangerous work psychologically sustainable. In the end, what had seemed like her most vulnerable moment had become the source of her greatest professional growth and contribution to national security. The aircraft lifted off into the night sky, carrying Sarah toward another mission where she would once again assume a false identity and navigate the complex challenges of gathering intelligence while maintaining operational security. But this time, she carried with her the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had successfully survived one of the most demanding assignments in special operations and emerged stronger for the experience. Her story would become part of the classified history of special operations, studied by future operatives who would face their own challenges in balancing mission requirements with personal integrity. The lessons learned from her experience would continue to influence how the military prepared its most elite personnel for the psychological demands of working in the shadows where truth and deception intersected in the service of national security. As the transport disappeared into the darkness, Sarah Martinez settled into her seat and began preparing mentally for her next role, another identity, another mission where success would depend on her ability to be someone other than herself while remaining true to the values and training that had brought her to this point in her career. The work was demanding, dangerous, and essential, exactly the kind of challenge that had drawn her to special operations in the first place.